Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. My uncle has always been a violent man. That is the simplest and most honest way to describe him. Violence is not something that appeared suddenly in his life or came out under rare circumstances. It has followed him everywhere, shaped every relationship he has ever had, and left lasting damage on everyone unlucky enough to be pulled into his orbit. Every woman he has ever been involved with eventually called the police because of domestic violence. Some of those calls came from hospital rooms. This was not rumor or exaggeration, but a pattern that repeated itself again and again, as predictable as it was horrifying. When I was a child, he tried to kill me. That is a story of its own, one that still sits heavy in my chest even decades later. There are countless other moments I could talk about, moments that would easily fill pages, and moments that reveal just how dangerous and unstable he was. Most of those stories were buried by my family, hidden behind silence, denial, and excuses. They preferred to pretend nothing had happened, to smooth things over and move on as if violence was just another uncomfortable topic to be avoided. But there was one incident so extreme, so undeniable, that even my family could not fully erase it. It is also the most disturbing story connected to him, even though I did not witness it myself. At the time, my uncle was living in my grandparents' house with his wife. She struggled with severe mental illness, something that should have made her someone in need of care, patience, and protection. Instead, it made her even more vulnerable to his cruelty. On the day everything happened, she had not gotten out of bed. She stayed there through the day, unable or unwilling to move, trapped in her own mind. My uncle became enraged because she had not made him dinner. Something as small and ordinary as a missed meal was enough to push him into a violent spiral. He beat her until she lost consciousness. This was not unusual in that house, which is a sentence that still feels unreal to write. Violence had become normalized there, treated as something unpleasant but acceptable, something to endure rather than stop. After she stopped responding, he decided that even that was not enough. He grabbed her by her long hair and began dragging her down the basement stairs. As her body was pulled step by step, she regained consciousness. She began screaming, the sound cutting through the house and spilling out into the neighborhood. Those screams are what finally brought outside attention. Neighbors heard them and called the police. But by the time help was on the way, the damage was already done. Partway down the stairs, the force became too much. Her scalp began to tear away from her skull. Even then, he did not stop. He continued dragging her, indifferent to her pain, her terror, or the reality of what he was doing. When the police arrived, the scene was undeniable. She was rushed to the hospital, and my uncle was arrested on the spot. There was no room for denial this time. My grandfather had witnessed everything. When questioned by the police, he explained the situation in a flat, almost casual tone. He said she had not gotten out of bed to make dinner, as if that detail somehow explained or justified what had happened. It was said without shame, without hesitation, and without any awareness of how horrifying it sounded. My grandmother shockingly told the truth. This was extremely rare in my family, where protecting appearances mattered more than protecting people. Her honest statement helped ensure that my uncle faced consequences, though those consequences were minimal compared to the harm he caused. He went to prison for less than a year. less than a year for an act of violence that permanently destroyed another person's life. His wife eventually divorced him and obtained a restraining order. On paper, that sounds like a resolution, but reality was far bleaker. She was never the same after the incident. The trauma compounded her mental illness, leaving her unable to live independently. To this day, she remains a long-term resident in a psychiatric facility because she poses a high risk to herself. Her life effectively stopped moving forward at that point, frozen in the aftermath of one man's unchecked rage. What haunts me most about this story is not just the violence itself, but what remained afterward. The basement stairs were soaked in blood. The carpet absorbed so much of it that it had to be removed entirely. But the blood did not stop there. It seeped through the carpet and into the wooden boards underneath. For reasons I still cannot fully understand, my family never properly dealt with it. No repairs were made. No effort was taken to remove or replace the stained wood. For nearly 30 years after that night, my grandparents continued to live in that house. The staircase remained unfinished, and the stain remained visible, stretching down its length like a silent witness. It was grotesque, impossible to ignore, and yet never acknowledged. I was repeatedly warned to never talk about it. Silence was not a suggestion. It was a rule. The stain became something we all learned to step around, both physically and emotionally. My uncle was welcomed back into the family. He even returned to living in the same house. As a child, I was forced to interact with him, to sit in the same rooms, to listen to his voice, all while knowing what he was capable of. The fear was constant. There was always the worry that one of us kids would ask the wrong question or make the wrong comment. The bloodstain was always there, and so was the unspoken terror that mentioning it might send him into another violent episode. That staircase became a symbol of everything my family refused to confront. It represented denial, complicity, and the willingness to prioritize comfort over accountability. It was easier for them to pretend it was just an old stain than to admit what it really meant. Every time I walked past it, I was reminded that truth could exist in plain sight and still be ignored. After my grandparents passed away, the house was eventually prepared for sale. Only then was the staircase covered with new carpet. The stain was hidden, not removed. It was buried beneath fabric, as if that could erase what had happened there. The house was sold, and new owners moved in, unaware of the history beneath their feet. I sometimes think about them. I wonder what would happen if they ever decided to renovate, and if they pulled up the carpet out of curiosity or necessity. I imagine the shock they would feel, discovering the dark marks still etched into the wood. I hope they never have to see it. At the same time, part of me feels that the truth deserves to be known, that silence only protects those who cause the harm. This story stays with me because it shows how violence doesn't end when the act itself is over. It lingers in houses, in families, in memories, and in the lives of people forever changed by it. It also shows how easily cruelty can be normalized when everyone agrees not to look too closely. The stain on those stairs was never just a stain. It was proof of a moment that shattered a woman's life and revealed the moral rot that surrounded my uncle, long before and long after that night. I was visiting a climate protest camp for a few days, not as someone deeply embedded in its daily structure, but as a temporary presence trying to understand what life there was really like. The camp had been standing for around 3 years by that point, which already said a lot about the determination of the people living there. It was not a small or short-term protest. Somewhere between 100 and 200 people lived there permanently, through all seasons, weather, and uncertainty. By the time I arrived, it felt less like a camp and more like a strange, fragile village built from fabric, rope, and stubborn hope. There were tents everywhere, clustered close together for warmth and safety. And then there were the tree structures. Some people lived high above the ground in elevated houses built into the trees and connected by ropes, ladders, and narrow platforms. Walking through the camp during the day felt surreal. You could hear voices coming from above you, see smoke rising from small fires where people cooked, and notice signs, banners, and handmade structures that told the story of years of resistance. The conflict itself was ongoing and unresolved. A large coal mining company owned land nearby and was waiting for court permission to claim the land the camp was on. Until that permission came through, the camp remained in a strange legal limbo. Police were present nearby, but not actively intervening. They did not have permission to evacuate the camp yet, but everyone knew they were waiting for the moment they could. Their presence was constant, quiet, and tense. It created an atmosphere where people felt watched, even when nothing was happening. There was an unspoken understanding that the camp was not protected in the same way as other places. If something went wrong, help might not come quickly, or at all. It was winter when I stayed there. Nights were cold, especially in a tent. You could feel the temperature drop as soon as the sun disappeared, and everything became still except for the wind moving through the trees. On the night it happened, I'd gone to sleep bundled deep inside my sleeping bag, layered in clothes, my breath visible in the air when I first lay down. The camp was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, where every sound seems louder because there are so few of them. At some point during the night, something changed. I did not wake up immediately. Instead, I drifted in that strange space between sleep and consciousness. I remember noticing that I no longer felt cold. In winter, that should have been alarming, but my brain did not register it as danger right away. I also remember faint crackling sounds, distant and oddly comforting, like a fire burning far away. None of it was strong enough to pull me fully awake. What finally woke me was a sudden, heavy sound. A thump landed close to my tent, loud enough to shake the ground slightly. Almost immediately after, there were shouts, real shouts, full of panic and urgency. Someone was yelling that there was a fire, that this was not a drill, that everyone needed to wake up and move. I could hear frantic movement all around me, people scrambling, zippers opening, feet running over frozen ground. I forced myself upright, heart racing, confusion mixing with fear. The moment I opened my tent, the reality hit me all at once. Several tents, just a few meters away, were already burning. Flames rose high into the night sky, bright and violent against the darkness. One of the things on fire was a large sack of insulation material that the camp relied on to survive the winter. It burned intensely, feeding the flames and making the fire spread faster. Someone had jumped out of their treehouse to escape the flames. That was the sound I had heard. They had chosen the risk of hitting the ground over the certainty of burning where they were. That image stayed with me. The idea of someone waking up to fire so close that jumping from height felt like the safer option. The air was thick with smoke, and everything smelled sharp and wrong. People were shouting instructions, grabbing water, pulling burning material away from other tents. Oh, despite the chaos, there was also an incredible level of coordination. People moved quickly, instinctively, doing whatever they could to stop the fire from spreading further. The fear was intense, but so was the determination to protect one another. By some miracle, the tents that burned were empty. No one was physically hurt. That fact alone still feels unreal when I think back on it. If the fire had started just a little earlier or a little later, people would have been inside, sleeping, trapped. The outcome could have been catastrophic. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the fire was extinguished. When everything finally settled, the camp looked wounded. Charred fabric, melted materials, blackened ground. People stood around in silence, wrapped in blankets, shaking from cold and adrenaline. The night felt different after that. Less safe, less predictable. Sleep was impossible. In the days that followed, fear settled over the camp like a fog. There was paranoia, but it did not feel irrational. Everyone was convinced it had been arson. Fires do not usually start like that in multiple places. In the middle of the night, the camp was open. Anyone could enter at any time. There were no fences, no gates, no security. That openness had always been part of its philosophy, but now it felt like a vulnerability that could be exploited again. There was no realistic way to start an investigation. The police were already aligned against the camp, waiting alongside the coal company for the chance to remove everyone. Involving them felt dangerous. Many believed that reporting the fire would only give authorities a reason to shut the camp down faster. There was a strong sense that if someone had intentionally set the fire, they would never be held accountable. That knowledge was deeply unsettling. The idea that someone could try to burn a community of people alive and face no consequences changed how the camp felt overnight. Every unfamiliar sound became suspicious. Every stranger passing through felt like a potential threat. At night, people slept lighter, listening more closely, ready to wake at the smallest disturbance. What haunted me most was not just the fire itself, but how exposed everyone was. This was a place built on trust, resistance, and the belief that standing together could create change. And yet in the face of real danger, that same community had no protection. I know authority was willing to step in on their behalf. Their safety depended entirely on themselves. Looking back, what stands out is how close it all came to disaster, and how easily it could have ended very differently. The fact that no one was hurt feels less like luck and more like a narrow escape from something unthinkable. Someone had decided that this group of people, sleeping in tents and trees in the middle of winter, were expendable. That knowledge stays with you. The camp continued after that, but it was changed. Something fragile had been broken. The fire was extinguished, but the fear lingered. Even now, remembering that night brings back the smell of smoke, the sound of shouting in the dark, and the sudden, terrifying realization that safety can disappear while you are asleep. Just this past Friday, the 13th, I already knew something was off before the day even really started. I wasn't feeling well at all. My ear had been hurting badly. The kind of deep throbbing pain that makes it hard to focus on anything else. By the time the day was halfway over, I accepted that it wasn't going to get better on its own. I decided to go to urgent care, hoping it would be something simple and easily treated. The visit itself was uneventful. The doctor confirmed it was an ear infection and wrote me a prescription for antibiotics. I remember feeling relieved, thinking that at least there was a clear answer and a clear solution. All I needed to do was pick up the medication and go home. It felt like the worst part of the day was already behind me. The drugstore was right down the street from my house, a place I'd been to countless times without a second thought. It was familiar, close, and usually quiet. I drove there on autopilot, focused more on the discomfort in my ear than on anything around me. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed something strange almost immediately. There was a man standing near a trash can, pulling garbage out and throwing it across the parking lot. Bags, loose trash, whatever he could grab. It was chaotic and aggressive, the kind of behavior that draws attention whether you want it to or not. I didn't stare, but I did glance in his direction, mostly out of instinct. When someone is making that much noise and disruption, it's hard not to look. That was enough. The moment he noticed me, his demeanor shifted completely. He locked eyes with me and started screaming. Not just yelling, but screaming with real rage behind it. He shouted that he was going to kill me. The words felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare or a bad movie, not something you expect to hear in the middle of a normal errand. Before I could even fully process what he was saying, he started walking toward me. My heart dropped. That moment when your body realizes you're in danger before your mind can catch up is hard to describe. Everything felt sharp and slow at the same time. I remember thinking that I was alone, that this was happening out in the open, in broad daylight, and that I had no idea what he was capable of. Then another man appeared. He came and stood beside me without hesitation, positioning himself in a way that made it clear he was there with me, not against me. I didn't know him. We hadn't spoken, but his presence changed the situation instantly. The man who had been threatening me turned his attention to both of us, screaming now that he would kill him too. For a few tense seconds, it felt like the situation could go either way. The air was thick with uncertainty. I could feel my pulse pounding. My body braced for something terrible to happen. Then something shifted. The threatening man seemed to take stock of the situation. Two people instead of one. Witnesses. Resistance. Whatever calculation he made, it ended with him deciding not to move closer. He turned and started walking away, still yelling. As he left, he shouted that he wasn't scared to kill us because he had already killed someone earlier that day. Hearing that sent a cold wave through me. It didn't sound like a bluff. It sounded casual, almost proud. Like a statement of fact rather than a threat meant to scare. Once he was far enough away, I went straight into the drugstore. I didn't even think about my prescription at first. I just wanted to be somewhere public, somewhere with walls and people and cameras, somewhere that felt safer than an open parking lot. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them what had happened, trying to keep my voice steady. I explained that a man had threatened to kill me and claimed he had already killed someone. Mostly, I wanted it documented. I wanted someone to know. I didn't feel safe going back outside right away. Eventually, the immediate danger passed. I got my medication, went home, and tried to calm myself down. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, wondering how close it had come to turning violent. I told myself that maybe he was just trying to intimidate people, that maybe he was lying, that maybe nothing more would come of it. I wanted to believe that. A few hours later, that illusion was shattered. I noticed police cars outside, not just one or two, but many. They were surrounding my neighbor's house. The lights, the presence, the seriousness of it all immediately made my stomach drop. This wasn't a minor incident. Something very wrong had happened. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. The same man from the parking lot had walked into my neighbor's house. What followed was horrific beyond comprehension. He stabbed my neighbor's dog multiple times. Then he murdered my neighbor, chopping off his head and disemboweling him. Learning that felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. The words didn't make sense at first. They felt too extreme, too violent to belong to the same ordinary day that had started with a trip to urgent care. But this wasn't a story from somewhere else. This wasn't something I read online. This happened steps away from my home. The realization that I had been standing face to face with someone capable of that kind of violence is something I still haven't fully processed. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't just trying to scare us. He meant exactly what he said. The only reason I was still alive was timing, chance, and the presence of another stranger who chose to stand beside me. That thought is deeply unsettling. It forces you to confront how thin the line is between a normal day and unimaginable tragedy. One glance, one decision to look in someone's direction, one moment of chance intervention. Any small change could have led to a completely different outcome. What stays with me the most is how ordinary everything felt, right up until it wasn't. I wasn't doing anything risky or unusual. I wasn't in a dangerous place or situation by choice. I was sick, tired, and running a simple errand close to home. The violence didn't come from some distant, shadowy corner of the world. It showed up in a familiar parking lot, attached to a stranger who looked like anyone else. Even now, it's hard to reconcile the memory of him yelling threats with the reality of what he went on to do. The human brain wants to separate those things, to believe that monsters are obvious, that danger announces itself clearly. But that's not how it works. Sometimes the warning signs are there, and sometimes they're brushed aside because accepting them would mean accepting how vulnerable we really are. I keep thinking about my neighbor, about his dog, about the life that was lost in a moment of senseless violence. I think about how close that violence came to spilling even further. And I think about the strange, heavy feeling of survival, knowing that nothing I did earned my safety, and nothing my neighbor did caused his death. That day changed how I see the world around me. It changed how I think about safety, randomness, and the fragile nature of everyday life. There is a before and an after now, separated by a few hours on a Friday the 13th, that will never truly leave me. When I was 7 years old, I learned what real fear felt like. Not the kind of fear that passes quickly, or the kind you forget after being comforted, but the kind that settles into your body and never fully leaves. I didn't understand it that way at the time. I just knew that something was very wrong, and that no adult around me was able to stop it. At that time, I was living in Russia with my mom and my older sister, who was 10. One night, we were walking home late after visiting one of my mom's friends. It was already dark, and the path we were taking was poorly lit, almost completely unlit in some places. It was quiet in the way that feels uncomfortable, where every sound seems louder because there are so few of them. I remember the cold air and the sound of our footsteps on the ground as we walked. At some point, I turned around. I don't remember why exactly. It might have been instinct, or maybe I heard something behind us. When I looked, I saw a man walking behind us, maybe 50 feet away. Even at 7, something about him didn't feel right to me. My chest tightened, and I felt that heavy sinking feeling in my stomach that told me I wasn't safe. I told my mom that I was scared. I told her there was a man following us. She looked back briefly and told me it was just someone walking home too. She said I needed to calm down and stop looking behind me. I wanted to believe her. She was my mom, and I trusted her. But my fear didn't go away. A few moments later, I looked back again. This time, he was much closer. Close enough that I could tell he was definitely following us. The distance between us had shrunk far too quickly. Panic took over me completely. I started begging my mom, telling her that he was coming after us, that something was wrong. My voice was shaking. I remember how desperate I felt, how badly I needed her to understand. This time, she believed me. We all started walking faster, our steps turning into an urgent speed walk. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. But it didn't matter how fast we tried to go. He caught up to us easily. Everything happened very quickly after that. But the memory of it feels frozen in time. Suddenly, he was right there. He reached out and put a knife to my mom's throat. I remember the glint of it in the dark and the way my brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. This was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a scare. This was happening. My mom didn't hesitate. She yelled for us to run. She shouted for my sister and me to run as fast as we could and not look back. Her voice was full of panic and urgency, and that sound is something I still hear in my head sometimes. My sister and I took off immediately. We didn't question it. We didn't think. We just ran. As we were running, my mom yelled my sister's name and told her to catch her purse. My mom was in the middle of applying for a visa at the time, and she had important documents inside it. Those papers meant everything to her future and to ours. But the man heard her. He told her that if she threw the purse, he would kill her. My sister and I didn't stop. We ran nonstop, fueled entirely by terror. I don't know how long we ran or how we didn't collapse. I just know that we kept going until we reached home. We about a mile away. My legs burned. My lungs hurt. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was that our mom wasn't with us. We burst into the apartment and found my mom's live-in boyfriend there. Even now, thinking about him fills me with anger. We told him that someone had attacked our mom and taken her. The words felt unreal coming out of my mouth. I was 7 years old, trying to explain something that shouldn't happen to anyone, let alone be spoken by a child. I don't remember why calling the police didn't occur to any of us. Looking back, it seems obvious, but at the time it wasn't. The police in that region of Russia were known for not caring, especially about things like this. They weren't seen as helpers. They were seen as useless at best, dangerous at worst. Even as a child, I had absorbed that understanding. What I do remember clearly is how the boyfriend reacted. He asked us what we wanted him to do. He actually asked us that. I was furious. Even at 7, I knew that this was wrong, that he should already be moving, already be looking for her. I screamed at him to go find her. I grabbed a steak knife and handed it to him, telling him to take it and go. After that, my sister and I were left alone. I sat by the front door for hours holding a butter knife. I don't know why I chose that knife or what I thought I could do with it, but it made me feel like I was doing something, like I wasn't completely helpless. I remember sitting there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open and for my mom to walk through it. Time moved strangely. Every sound made my heart jump. Every minute felt like an hour. I didn't cry much. I think I was past crying. I was focused on waiting, on being ready, on holding that knife as if it was the only thing keeping me together. When the boyfriend came back, it was hours later, and he was alone. He said he couldn't find her. I was overwhelmed with anger and disbelief. I told him to keep looking. I told him not to come back without her. I was a child speaking to an adult, but in that moment I felt like the only one who cared enough to demand action. Eventually morning came. My mom returned in broad daylight. I remember the light outside and how wrong it felt that the world was going on as normal. She barely looked like herself. She was beaten so badly that she was almost unrecognizable. Her clothes were torn. She had no pants or underwear. She was covered in blood. The man had taken her behind some sheds. He raped her and beat her. After he was done, he left her there. Somehow she got up. Somehow she walked over a mile home in the daylight, half naked and injured. People saw her, people passed her. No one stopped to help. That part is almost harder to understand than the attack itself. The idea that someone could see a woman in that condition and choose to look away, that no one intervened, that no one offered help, that she had to make that walk alone. As a child, I didn't have the words for what had happened to her. I didn't fully understand it. I just knew that something terrible had been done, and that it had changed everything. Our home never felt the same again. My mom was never the same again, and neither was I. That night and the morning after became something that lived inside me. It shaped how I see danger, how I trust adults, how I understand the world. It taught me early that being afraid doesn't always mean you'll be protected, and that sometimes children see the truth before adults are willing to accept it. I still think about that path, about how dark it was, about how close we came to not making it home at all. I think about my mom telling us to run, choosing our lives over her own safety without hesitation. I think about 7-year-old me sitting by the door with a butter knife, believing that willpower alone could bring her back. That memory never fades. It doesn't soften with time. It just becomes something you learn to carry. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. A few years back, I went out with a girlfriend to the Blue Martini in Tampa. It wasn't meant to be anything dramatic or wild. We just wanted one of those nights where you get dressed up a little, feel good about yourself, and dance. Nothing complicated, nothing risky, at least not in our minds. We were there to enjoy the music, move around, laugh, and then go home. We got dressed nicely, did our hair and makeup, and went out feeling light and carefree. The place had the usual energy of a popular lounge, loud music, dim lighting, people everywhere. We started dancing and ended up dancing with 2 guys we met there. It felt harmless. We were all laughing, moving around, and just enjoying the night. There were no red flags at that point, nothing that made me feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I ordered one small drink early in the night. Just one. I remember being very conscious of it, sipping it slowly and nursing it the entire time we were there. I wasn't trying to get drunk. I wasn't even close to drunk. I wanted to stay clear-headed so I could dance, enjoy myself, and still feel in control. At some point, after dancing for a while, I needed to use the ladies' room. I didn't think twice about it. I left my drink at the table, assuming I'd be right back, and went. It felt normal, routine, something I'd done many times before without issue. When I came back out, everything had changed. My friend was gone. She wasn't on the dance floor. She wasn't by the bar. She was sitting at our table, but not alone. Sitting there with her purse in my purse and with my drink still on the table were the 2 guys we had been dancing with. My stomach dropped immediately. Something felt wrong, but I didn't yet understand why. They told me that she had said she needed to leave and that they would see me out, that she didn't want to wait. I was confused and immediately tried calling her. She didn't answer. I texted. Nothing. I didn't know it at the time, but later it all came out that she had been annoyed because the guy dancing with me had turned her down. She felt rejected and upset and decided to leave without me. That detail still makes my blood boil. Over something so small, so meaningless, she left me alone in a situation that would almost cost me everything. At the time, though, I didn't know any of that. I just felt abandoned and confused. But I didn't panic. I told myself I was fine. We had been dancing with these guys almost all night. We had talked. We had laughed. I felt relatively safe because of that familiarity. I convinced myself that nothing bad could happen in such a short time with people I'd already been around. That was the naive part of me. The part that believed proximity and time meant safety, like the innocent, trusting girl I was back then. I picked up my drink and took a couple of sips. Maybe two. Maybe a few more. I didn't finish it. Something didn't feel right, and I stopped. I still wasn't drunk. I know that clearly. I wasn't slurring. I wasn't dizzy. I was still myself. I remember telling them goodnight. I remember them offering to walk me to my car. And I remember saying no. I was firm about it. I told them I was fine and didn't need an escort. I wanted to leave on my own terms and get home. After that, things become fragment. The next clear memory I have is waking up to a security guard knocking on my car window. I didn't know where I was at first. I was disoriented, confused, and deeply uncomfortable in my own body. That man, that security guard, is someone I still think about with gratitude. I hope with everything in me that life has been kind to him since that day. Later, he explained what he had seen. He told me he had been watching the crowd as part of his job when he noticed me coming down the escalator. He saw the two men close behind me and said he immediately got a very bad feeling. Not something he could explain logically, just instinct. Something didn't sit right with him, so he followed us. When the men realized that he was following, they slowed down and eventually trailed off. He kept watching as I walked to my car. Apparently, I unlocked it. I got inside, locked the door, and then completely passed out. Just slumped there. Gone. Whatever they had put in my drink worked incredibly fast. From the top of the escalator to my car door was not a long walk, but that was all it took. The security guard said he stood there and waited. He watched the men drive away. Something still didn't feel right to him, so he decided to check on me. When he knocked on my window and I responded with absolute nonsense, he knew something was very wrong. Either I was extremely drunk, or I had been drugged. He called the police. I have flashes of memory from that part. The cops arriving. Them asking me questions about the men, what they looked like, what they were wearing, what I remembered. I remember feeling horribly sick. My body felt overheated, like I was burning from the inside out. I felt trapped inside my own skin. And then I vomited, violently, right there. That's when it became clear to everyone what had happened. They had roofied me. There is no doubt in my mind what their intentions were. They weren't trying to be kind. They weren't trying to make sure I got home safe. They were planning to hurt me. The only reason they didn't is because someone paid attention. Because one man listened to his instincts and decided to act. When the gravity of it all finally sank in, I was shaken to my core. The realization that I had been so close to something unspeakable left me hollow. I replayed the night over and over in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, blaming myself for trusting, for sipping the drink, for not leaving sooner, for not insisting my friend stay. But the truth is, the blame never belonged to me. A few days later, I went back to the Blue Martini. I wanted to find that security guard. I needed to see him again, to thank him properly, to hug him, to tell him what he had done for me. When I finally saw him, I hugged him tightly and thanked him over and over. I don't think I had the words to express how much his actions meant to me. He was humble and kind about it. He smiled politely and told me it was nothing. He said he had a mom and 2 sisters, and that he would want someone to protect them, too. That was it. No hero speech, No expectation of praise, just decency. That sentence still makes me emotional. That night changed me. It changed how I go out. It changed how I watch people. It changed how I think about safety and trust and how quickly everything can turn. It taught me that danger doesn't always look obvious and that predators don't always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they blend in. Sometimes they laugh with you. Sometimes they wait until you're alone. And it taught me something else, too. If you go out with your girlfriend, you do not leave her there. Ever. No matter how annoyed you are, no matter how rejected you feel, no matter how small the issue seems in the moment, you leave together or you make sure she is safe. Period. I survived because of a stranger who chose to care. And because of that, I will never stop telling this story. This happened sometime around 1990 or 1991, when I was still in grade school, living in a small town where nothing ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the school felt safe by default, and where danger was something you saw on the news, not something that showed up in your daily life. I was either in second or third grade at the time. The details blur a little with age, but the feeling of that week has never faded. It started on a Wednesday morning. I woke up feeling awful. My head hurt. My stomach felt off. And I had that heavy, sluggish feeling that kids get when they're coming down with something but don't yet realize how bad it's going to be. I told my parents I felt sick, but I still wanted to go to school. The reason mattered a lot to me at the time. We had a spelling test that day, and if I did well, I would earn a homework pass. I was weirdly proud of collecting those. I saved them carefully and almost never used them. To me, they were proof that I was doing well, that I was responsible. So I went to school anyway. The morning passed normally enough. I remember feeling tired and a little warm, but nothing alarming. I took my spelling test and did well, earning the homework pass I'd been hoping for. I felt accomplished, like the day had already been a success. If I had known what the rest of the week was going to look like, that small victory would have felt strangely important, like the last normal moment before everything went sideways. By the time gym class rolled around, things changed quickly. I remember suddenly feeling much worse. My head was pounding, my body felt heavy, and the room seemed too bright and too loud. My fever spiked hard and fast. The teacher noticed something was wrong, and before I knew it, I was being sent home. After that, most of the week is a blur. I spent the next several days passed out on the couch at home. I was sick in a way that completely took me out. I slept almost constantly, waking only to go to the bathroom or to drink some water. Every time I tried to sit up or stand, intense nausea hit me. It felt like my body couldn't tolerate being upright at all. Even small movements were exhausting. I wasn't watching TV, playing, or doing anything remotely fun. I was just gone, out of it. Time stopped meaning much. Days blended together. The world outside the living room barely existed for me. At some point during that week, my younger brother came home from school and started talking about something strange. He was 2 grades below me, younger enough that I didn't take everything he said seriously. He told me that a killer clown had come to the school that day. I didn't believe him for a second. My brother loved making things up to scare me. He had a habit of telling exaggerated stories, especially if he thought it would get a reaction. And honestly, I wasn't even sure I had really heard him correctly. I was sick, half asleep, and barely aware of what was going on around me. It was entirely possible that I imagined the conversation or misunderstood it. A killer clown at school sounded ridiculous, like something from a cartoon or a bad horror movie, not real life. So I brushed it off. The rest of the week passed in a fog of fever and sleep. I didn't think about school much at all. I didn't think about the clown story again. My focus was entirely on surviving the sickness and waiting to feel normal again. By the time Monday rolled around, I was finally much better, still tired but functional. The fever was gone, the nausea had eased, and I felt well enough to return to school. I remember feeling oddly relieved to go back, like I was rejoining the world after being gone for a long time. That feeling didn't last. On the bus ride to school, something immediately felt off. Instead of the usual chatter about cartoons, toys, or whatever kids talked about back then, everyone was talking about the same thing: the killer clown. At first, I thought this had to be some kind of elaborate joke. Maybe my brother had started a rumor that somehow spread. It seemed unlikely, but not impossible. He was 6. Kids exaggerate. Stories mutate fast in elementary school. Still, it felt strange how many people were talking about it and how seriously they were taking it. As the bus got closer to school, the details started coming out. Kids were talking over each other, filling in pieces of the story. The clown wasn't just someone dressed up. He was dangerous. He had a knife. He had run through the halls. He had chased someone. My stomach tightened, and not because I was still sick. And when we got to school and I went to my classroom, it was the same thing all over again. The killer clown was all anyone wanted to talk about. It wasn't just a few kids repeating the silly story. Everyone seemed shaken. Even the kids who usually loved joking around were serious. They said he had run down the hallway outside our classroom, that he had been holding a knife, that he had chased at least one student. Some kids swore they had seen him. Others said they had heard screaming or teachers yelling. I remember sitting at my desk, listening, trying to make sense of it. The pieces didn't fit with the version of the world I understood. This wasn't how school was supposed to work. Adults were supposed to keep things safe. Bad things weren't supposed to happen in the middle of a normal school day, especially not things like this. What made it even more unsettling was the realization that my brother couldn't have orchestrated this. He didn't know my classmates. He didn't have access to kids in my grade. There was no way he could have planted a story that lined up so closely across so many different people. At that point, denial stopped working. I decided to ask my teacher. I remember walking up to her desk, nervous but determined. I asked her quietly if what everyone was saying was true. I didn't phrase it dramatically. I just wanted confirmation or denial. I wanted an adult to tell me that it wasn't real, that it was a misunderstanding, that everything was fine. She didn't answer. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She shut the conversation down immediately. She told me we weren't going to talk about it and redirected me back to my seat. Her tone wasn't angry, but it was firm, final. That response told me everything. If it had been a rumor, she would have corrected it. If it had been nonsense, she would have reassured us. The fact that she didn't want to talk about it at all meant something serious had happened. Something adults didn't want us to dwell on. I remember sitting there afterward, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because something truly dangerous had been close to me, close to my classroom, close to my friends. Relief, because I hadn't been there. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely grateful to have been sick. The idea that if my fever hadn't spiked, if I hadn't been sent home, I might have been walking those same halls when it happened, was terrifying. The randomness of it hit me hard. One spelling test, one fever, one early dismissal. Those small things had kept me away from something I didn't fully understand, but knew was bad. The rest of the day felt strange and heavy. School didn't feel the same. The halls felt different, like they had absorbed something dark. Even though nothing happened that day, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Teachers were more watchful, and kids were quieter. No official explanation was ever given to us, at least not in a way I remember. There were no assemblies, no clear story, no reassurance beyond silence and avoidance. It was like everyone agreed to move on without ever really acknowledging what had happened. But kids don't forget things like that. The story stuck with us. It became one of those things that lived in the background of our memories, growing more surreal with time. As I got older, I would sometimes think back on it and wonder what really happened. Was it exactly as the kids described? Was it exaggerated? Was it worse? I don't know. What I do know is how it felt to realize for the first time that safety was not guaranteed just because you were a child in a small-town school. That bad things could slip through cracks you didn't even know existed. That sometimes adults stay quiet not because nothing happened, but because something did. Even now, thinking back on it gives me a strange chill. Not because of the image of a clown, but because of how close danger came without my knowing it at the time. Because of how easily things could have gone differently. And because of the unsettling truth that sometimes the only thing that saves you is dumb luck and a fever that sends you home early. I first heard this story while I was in Korea, and even though it didn't happen to me personally, it stayed with me in a way that few stories ever have. It's the kind of story that quietly changes how you think about ordinary things like elevators, late nights, and the moments when you realize just how vulnerable a person can be without ever doing anything wrong. It happened late at night, around midnight. The girl had just finished work, or something similar, and was walking home alone. That in itself wasn't unusual. In big cities, especially ones where people work long hours, it's common to be out late. Still, the streets were mostly empty by that time. It was dark, quiet, and the kind of night where sounds feel amplified because there are so few of them. She lived in an apartment building with an elevator. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. This was her routine. She had done this walk and taken that elevator countless times before. Familiarity can be comforting, but it can also make you let your guard down without realizing it. When she reached the building, she went inside and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened and she stepped in. She was alone. The doors started to close, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. She was probably already thinking about getting inside her apartment, taking off her shoes, and finally resting after a long day. Just before the doors fully shut, someone rushed in. A strange man entered the elevator at the last second. He was wearing a very bright red hoodie, the kind that immediately draws attention. The sudden movement startled her. In such a quiet space, with no warning, it was enough to make her heart jump. He immediately apologized for scaring her. He didn't look at her when he spoke. His eyes stayed down, his posture casual, as if he were just another tired person heading home. His voice didn't sound angry or threatening. On the surface, everything about the interaction seemed almost polite. Then he asked her which floor she was going to. That question made her uncomfortable, but she answered anyway. Fear can do that. It can make you comply even when you don't want to, especially when you're trapped in a small enclosed space with someone you don't know. She told him her floor number. He pressed the button for a floor, and then he pressed the button for the floor just below it. That detail would matter later. The elevator began to move upward. The space felt suddenly much smaller. The hum of the elevator motor filled the silence. She stayed still, watching the numbers change above the door. Her body was tense now, her instincts quietly warning her that something wasn't right, even if she couldn't yet explain why. As they went up, the man spoke again. He asked if he could borrow her cell phone. The request immediately raised alarms in her mind. It was late. They were alone. She didn't know him. There was no reason he couldn't wait until he got out or use his own phone. She declined. She said no. After that, she moved away from him as much as the small space allowed. She positioned herself in the corner of the elevator, putting as much distance between them as possible. Her heart was racing now. She wasn't imagining danger anymore. She was actively afraid. The elevator continued upward in silence. Seconds passed, stretched out and heavy. Every second felt longer than the last. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in on her. She avoided looking at him directly, staring instead at the floor numbers, willing the elevator to hurry. Finally, the elevator reached the floor just below the one she had told him she lived on. The doors opened. The man didn't rush out. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. Once he was outside the elevator, he stopped. Then he turned around. He faced the elevator, he faced her, and he just stared. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He simply stood there, looking at her in a way that made her blood run cold. The silence was unbearable. Her body felt frozen, trapped between the instinct to run and the reality that there was nowhere to go. Slowly, the elevator doors began to close. As the gap between the doors narrowed, she kept her eyes on him, unable to look away. And in that narrowing space, in that final sliver of visibility, she saw something that confirmed her worst fear. She saw him turn away from the elevator. She saw him start heading up the stairs, and she saw him pulling a knife out of his pocket. The doors closed completely. The elevator continued upward. In those few seconds between floors, everything changed. The fear she had felt before turned into something deeper and more terrifying. She understood, with horrifying clarity, what would have happened if she had told him the wrong floor. What would have happened if the elevator had stopped at her floor first? What would have happened if she had been standing in a hallway instead of inside a metal box that was now moving away from him? When the elevator reached her floor, she didn't hesitate. She got out immediately. She didn't walk calmly. She didn't try to act normal. She moved as fast as she could, unlocking her door, getting inside, and locking it behind her. Only then did her body finally react fully to what had almost happened. Stories like this are frightening, not because of what happened, but because of how close they come to something far worse. Nothing violent actually occurred in that elevator. No one was physically hurt. And yet, the danger was real. It was intentional. It was planned. The man didn't randomly pull out a knife. He didn't act on impulse. He waited. He gathered information. He asked questions. He chose his moment carefully. The only thing that stopped him was timing and a small detail that worked in her favor. That's what makes this story linger in your mind. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it wears a polite apology. Sometimes it avoids eye contact. Sometimes it asks simple questions that seem harmless on the surface. Sometimes it waits just long enough to see if you'll make a mistake. It also shows how important instinct can be. The girl didn't have proof that something was wrong when she declined to lend her phone or when she moved to the corner of the elevator. She just felt it. She listened to that feeling, even though it probably made her feel rude or awkward in the moment. That choice may have saved her life. When I heard this story, it made me think differently about elevators, about small enclosed spaces, about how quickly a normal situation can turn dangerous. It made me think about how often people, especially women, are expected to ignore their fear in order to be polite or accommodating. This story doesn't end with violence, but it doesn't end happily either. It ends with a realization of how close someone came to being seriously harmed. A realization that safety is sometimes nothing more than a few seconds, a closed door, or an elevator moving in the right direction. And that realization stays with you long after the story is over. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.